Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We're going to be talking about something today that I think is pretty important for anybody who uses technology. And, well, that's all of us these days, right?
Right.
And that is China's use of technology in ways that some might say are concerning. We'll be taking a look at this through the lens of a logbook entry by Dmitrii Gorbatenko.
Yeah, it's called The Dual-Edged Sword of Technological Advancements of China, Control and Suppression.
And let me tell you, the way Gorbatenko describes China's surveillance is, well, it's kind of unsettling. It goes way beyond anything most of us are used to.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about facial recognition being used everywhere, and I mean everywhere, not just to catch criminals. They use it to track pretty much everyone's every move.
Yeah, and it's not just cameras, you know. It's really the technology behind it that's so advanced. We're talking algorithms that can pick out a single face in a huge crowd, and they've got AI that scans everything you do online, looking for any little hint of disagreement with anything, really.
So it's not enough to just watch what you do. They're trying to predict what you might do based on all that data they're collecting. Now, some folks might say, hey, isn't that a good thing? More security, less crime? But Gorbatenko digs into a really important question here.
What's that?
What's the price of all this so-called safety?
Exactly.
And this is where he gets into this thing called the social credit system.
Ah, yes, the social credit system. It's like they're keeping score of how good of a citizen you are.
Yeah. Like, can you imagine? Every little thing you do online, offline, it all gets assigned points. You pay your bills on time, you volunteer, bam, points.
Yeah.
But then say something the government doesn't like online, or even just jaywalk points deducted.
Like, I don't know, like an episode of Black Mirror or something. But it's real life.
Yeah.
In China, this score can really affect you.
Oh, yeah. Like, in major ways. A bad score can mean no loans, no travel, maybe even no job.
You're basically living in a world where you're constantly second-guessing yourself, always worried about what you say, what you do.
Makes you wonder how people in China are dealing with this. Are they just accepting it?
Well, Gorbatenko does talk about some examples of pushback.
Oh.
But it's a tough fight.
Right.
He mentions activists who are using tech to try and get around the censors and expose what's really happening.
Yeah.
But it's risky business.
Absolutely.
The government is always one step ahead, coming up with new ways to shut down dissent.
So it's this constant back and forth. The estate wants control. The people want freedom.
That's it.
I mean, is this the future we're all headed for? A world where technology is used to limit our freedoms?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's not just about China either.
Right.
These technologies are spreading. Other countries are starting to adopt them, which brings up a whole other set of issues, kind of like a new form of digital colonialism.
Okay.
But before we get into that, I think it's important to look at another aspect of all this.
Okay.
The economic side of things.
Yeah, Gorbatenko definitely doesn't shy away from pointing out the huge gap between how advanced China's technology is and the reality for a lot of its people.
Yeah.
Despite all this economic growth, so many people are stuck in these low-paying jobs, the working conditions. Awful.
Yeah, and some of the examples he gives really make you think.
Like what?
He compares the billions they're spending on these super sophisticated surveillance systems to the tiny wages they're paying the people who actually make those systems.
Yeah.
It's just, it's crazy. It's almost like the people who build the tech are the ones being hurt by it the most.
So while China is out there showing off its technological power, there's this whole other story that's often ignored.
Right, a human cost to all this progress.
Which begs the question, who is really benefiting from all this technology? Is it really lifting people out of poverty, or is it just making the powerful even more powerful?
And from an ethical standpoint, how can you justify spending so much on surveillance when so many of your people are struggling just to get by?
It's a tough question.
It is, and it's one that has implications way beyond China.
Right. This isn't just their problem. This imbalance has ripple effects that we all feel.
Yeah, we're all connected.
And this is where Gorbatenko brings up another big concern, the environmental impact of it all. China's really going full speed ahead with industrialization, and, well, that has some serious consequences for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, their reliance on coal and fossil fuels, it's not just a local problem anymore.
Right.
He points out that China is the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases.
Wow.
And you know, it's interesting. He ties their surveillance tech industry directly to this problem.
Oh, how so?
A lot of those rare earth minerals that are used in high-tech gadgets, things like smartphones and computers, well, they're mostly mined in China. And the mining process, it can be really damaging to the environment.
So the very technology they're using for control is also contributing to a problem that impacts us all.
Exactly.
Climate change.
It's a global issue.
Yeah.
And Gorbatenko really drives this point home with this example he gives about air pollution.
Yeah.
He says you can actually trace pollution from Chinese factories all the way across the Pacific.
Wow.
It's affecting air quality in North America.
That's incredible. And it really shows how interconnected we all are. What happens in China doesn't stay in China.
Definitely not. It makes you think we should be doing more to encourage more sustainable practices in China, especially when it comes to their tech industry. But then Gorbatenko takes things in an even more, complex direction. He starts talking about how China's using technology to gain influence around the world. It's almost like a new kind of imperialism.
Yes. This is where the idea of digital colonialism comes into play.
Right.
He uses China's Belt and Road Initiative as an example.
Right.
On the surface, it looks like this big, helpful infrastructure project.
Roads, bridges, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But Gorbatenko argues that there's a whole technological agenda behind it.
Interesting.
It's not just about building physical stuff.
So what else are they doing?
They're exporting entire digital ecosystems. 5G networks built by Chinese companies like Huawei, surveillance systems based on their own model, even social media platforms that have censorship tools built right in. Wow. It's like a package deal. You get the new roads, and along with it, you get a whole new way of controlling information. Makes you wonder, are the countries that are signing up for this, are they giving up control over their citizens' data without even realizing it?
It's a real concern. Are they trading their data sovereignty for a shiny new infrastructure?
It's like a Trojan horse, almost. You get all this great new stuff, but at what cost? Gorbatenko specifically mentions some African nations that are becoming more and more dependent on Chinese surveillance tech.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just for monitoring. They're using it to crack down on political opposition.
That's where Gorbatenko's critique gets really sharp. He's saying this isn't just about spreading technology. It's about exporting a whole model of government, one that prioritizes control over freedom.
And what does he call it?
Techno-authoritarianism.
Techno-authoritarianism.
I mean, are we seeing the rise of a new world order here? One where technology is mostly used to limit what people can do, what they can say? That's the big question Gorbatenko wants us to think about. He's not saying that all technology is bad.
Right.
But he's saying we need to be aware of how it can be misused, especially when it's tied to a country's political goals. And that leads to his final point, which is maybe the toughest one to swallow.
What's that?
It's not enough to just sit back and criticize.
No.
We need to actually do something to counter these trends.
Yeah, but how do you even begin to push back against a superpower like China?
He doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
But he does suggest a few things we can do.
Okay.
First, we need to raise awareness, make sure people understand what's at stake with all these technological choices we're making. He also talks about the need for more transparency and accountability from tech companies. And that goes for Western companies, too, not just Chinese ones.
That's a good point. Even if we're not directly affected by China's surveillance state, a lot of the tech they're developing, it's finding its way into our lives.
Yeah, maybe not in such obvious ways.
Like,
think about facial recognition at airports.
Yes.
Or in shopping malls. Think about the algorithms that decide what we see on social media.
Right.
Those things aren't neutral. They reflect certain values. They have power built into them.
So what Gorbatenko's saying is we need to be more aware of the choices we're making.
As individuals and as a society.
I gotta say, this is pretty heavy stuff. It feels like, I don't know, we've gone down this really dark path here. Is Gorbatenko saying that technology is just bad news? Is he pessimistic about the future?
Well, I wouldn't say he's, completely doom and gloom about it. He definitely sees the potential for technology to do good things. Connecting people, solving problems, making life better. But his point is that we can't just assume that technology is always going to be used for good. It's not a given.
So it's not the technology itself that's the problem, right? It's how we use it and who has the power to make those decisions.
Yeah, exactly. He says we have to be more deliberate about how we shape the future of technology. We can't just let it shape us. And that means paying attention to the power dynamics. Who benefits from the technology? Who's being exploited? Who's being silenced?
He uses this phrase, techno-solutionism, like the idea that you can just throw technology at any problem and poof, it's solved. But as we've been talking about, technology can just as easily make things worse or create whole new problems.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, one of Gorbatenko's key takeaways. Technology is never neutral. It always reflects the values and priorities of the people who create it, who control it.
So where do we go from here? I mean, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this. What can one person realistically do?
Well, Gorbatenko has some ideas about where to start. First off, just being informed, understanding how these technologies actually work, what the risks are, who's profiting. He also talks about supporting groups that are fighting for digital rights and privacy in China and around the world.
And I guess it comes down to the choices we make as consumers, too. What kind of companies are we supporting? Are we demanding more transparency from these big tech companies, more accountability?
Yeah, absolutely. Our choices matter, even small things like choosing apps that respect your privacy or speaking out against censorship. Those things add up.
So it's not about, becoming some tech genius overnight. It's about being aware, being engaged with the technology that's all around us.
Exactly. I think Gorbatenko's message is ultimately a hopeful one. He thinks we can create a future where technology works for everyone, not just for control and suppression. But, it's going to take work.
Well, that's, I think, a good place to leave it. Definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And for anyone who wants to learn more, we'll put some links in the show notes to Gorbatenko's work and some other resources.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.